We are convening this extremely urgent hearing on the desperate plight of Christians and other religious minorities in Iraq and Syria. As images of beheaded American journalists James Foley and Stephen Sotloff are seared into our consciousness, we would do well to honor their memories by recalling what they saw as their mission to alert the world to the horrors committed by the fanatical terrorist group ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Children forced to view crucifixions and beheadings, women bartered, sold, and raped, prisoners lined up on their knees to be shot. This is the ISIS legacy. Today, Christians and other religious minorities such as Yazidis, Shabaks, and Turkmen Shiites are not just facing a long winter without homes. They are not just hungry and thirsty and wandering from village to village in northern Iraq and Kurdistan. They are facing annihilation, genocide, by fanatics who see anyone who does not subscribe to its draconian and violent interpretation of Islam as fair game for enslavement, forced conversion, or death. If the phrase "never again" is to be more than a well-meaning sentiment we simply give lip service to, then we must be prepared to act when we see genocide unfold before our very eyes. As the United States pulled out of Iraq in March 2011, we left in charge a prime minister hostile to political inclusion of all Iraqis beyond simply Shiites. The Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, also known as the Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham, or ISIS, saw an opportunity to exploit Sunni sentiment at this treatment and surged to fill the gap. We withdrew, they surged. This is not the junior varsity team of terrorists as the president dismissively asserted earlier this year. Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iran and Iraq, Brett McGurk, has described ISIL as having unprecedented resources in terms of funds, weapons, and personnel. We have seen what ISIS is doing in Syria, beheading and crucifying Christians and political opponents, taking hostages and kidnapping religious leaders, blowing up churches and mosques, and forcing religious minorities to convert, flee with the clothes on their backs, or pay an exorbitant tax for infidels, or die. When ISIS overran Mosul in June, Mosul's 35,000 inhabitants, not too old or sick, fled for their lives. At checkpoints leaving the city, ISIS took the Christians' wedding rings, money, travel papers, and medicines, and even their cars. Families walked carrying their children, pushing wheelchairs and elderly parents, mile and after mile into the hot, barren Nineveh plain. As ISIS continued to gain territory in July and August, the Christians fled further north, joining Yazidi and many other minorities trying to find safety in the Iraqi Kurdistan region. More than 1.7 million people have been displaced in Iraq this year. Many were Christians who fled the brutal Syrian civil war, now on the run again. Where will they be safe? Kurdistan, a region of 8.35 million people, currently hosts nearly 750,000 refugees. The Kurdish militias are underfunded and underarmed now that ISIS has captured U.S. heavy weapons across Iraq, yet they soldier on. I have received emails from bishops and nuns chronicling the dire needs of their flocks who are being exterminated and expelled from regions their people have occupied for millennia. The U.S. has, in the last few weeks, geared up for the humanitarian crisis. As of September 5th, the U.S. has dedicated nearly $140 million in humanitarian assistance to Iraq, and USAID airlifted more than 60 metric tons of humanitarian aid into Kurdistan's capital of Erbil. We need, however, to make sure that the aid gets to people who need it most. This means, of course, working with religious leaders who are the closest to those in need. We also have to invest more in our relationship with the Kurdish regional government, a regional government which has taken on the aspects of a de facto national government, and one whose brave militia have stood up against ISIS while members of the Iraqi armed forces have folded and fled. It must also be remarked and remembered with gratitude that the Kurdish regional government has extended protection to Christians and other victims of religious persecution. While their record has not been perfect, The Kurds appear to be more tolerant of diversity of thought and belief than many of their neighbors. But aid alone is not the solution. The U.S. has already spent some $2.4 billion on the Syrian humanitarian crisis that rages on. We do need shrewd power, a strategy for action that is in touch with reality on the ground, a strategy born of thinking ahead and preparing in advance for the contingencies so that we are not playing catch-up while the enemy rapes, pillages, kidnaps, and massacres and amasses wealth and weapons. The reality for religious minorities is that their very lives are at risk as long as ISIS controls territory and continues to gain strength on the ground, drawing funds and fighters from around the globe. As Pope Francis has noted with regard to this crisis, and I quote, "Where there is unjust aggression, it is licit to stop the unjust aggressors." Of course, that may indeed require the use of force, but it also requires using other means that are at our disposal. I have called for the establishment of a Syrian War Crimes Tribunal, introduced H-Con Res 51, to hold all sides accountable for the heinous atrocities they have committed. H-Con Res 51, introduced last September, calls for the creation of an international tribunal like Sierra Leone, like the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, that would be more flexible and more efficient than the International Criminal Court, which has already been vetoed by the Russians anyway, to ensure accountability for human rights violations committed by all sides. I believe with a Herculean effort pushed by the United States and other interested nations, past success in creating war crime courts can indeed be prologue. Such a tribunal would also draw upon past experience. We had two hearings, one by the full committee and one of my subcommittee, in which we heard from David Crane, the former chief prosecutor at the Sierra Leone tribunal. He was the one, and his tribunal were the ones that put Charles Taylor behind bars and now has entered into his 50 years of sentence. Nobody ever thought in the beginning that Charles Taylor would be behind bars, especially after the atrocities and the power that he yielded. Such a tribunal, like I said, would draw upon these past experiences, but it would also be a mechanism that's robust enough to right, or at least bring some justice to the most egregious wrongs, yet nimble enough not to derail chances for peace due to rigidity. Foreign Affairs approved H-Con Res 51 on April 30th, and our hope is that the House will take it up, but frankly, the administration can take this up and do this anytime it pleases. As ISIS does not respect borders, of course, the idea behind this would be Iraq and Syria. Today, the black flag of ISIS flies over vast swaths of northern Iraq and even cities such as Fallujah, which we had won at such great cost. Indeed, ISIS says that they intend to see the black flag fly over the White House. Where the black flag flies, there is only death and misery. We have to do everything humanly possible to stop this cancer from spreading. Ms. Bass.